I'm Clara, 42 years old, a tenured professor at a well-known university. My life has always revolved around my work, research, teaching, and the quiet satisfaction of academic achievement. It's a world where I've found a measure of control and validation, something that was harder to come by in my personal life, especially within my family. Growing up, I always felt like I played second fiddle to my younger sister, Sarah. She was beautiful, charming, and effortlessly popular, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. Meanwhile, I was the studious one, the quiet one, the one who could lose herself for hours in books and lectures. Our parents adored Sarah, and I never quite measured up to her in their eyes. I wasn't jealous exactly, but I felt overlooked and unnoticed. Then, I met David. He was 45, successful, and charming in that confident, polished way that always made him the center of attention in any room. We met at an academic conference, and over time, our connection deepened. We shared ideas, challenges, and dreams. He seemed to understand me in a way no one ever had before. When he proposed, it felt like everything in my life was finally falling into place. I was going to marry someone who truly appreciated me, not my looks or my social status, but my mind, my work, and my person. We decided to celebrate our engagement with a party, a small gathering of friends and family. It should have been a joyous occasion, but from the moment we arrived, I sensed something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was an awkward tension between David and Sarah. At first, I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. After all, this was the happiest day of my life. But as the evening went on, I couldn't ignore it anymore. There were too many strange glances, too many whispers. At one point, I excused myself to get some air, feeling a strange weight settling in my chest. I stepped outside, hoping the cool night air would clear my head, but the gnawing sense of unease followed me. I returned to the house, hoping I was imagining things. But then, I decided to check on a few things in my bedroom, papers for a project I was working on. I opened the door and froze. There they were, David and Sarah together, in my room, in a way that left no room for doubt. They were tangled in each other's arms, their bodies intertwined in an intimate embrace. The shock hit me like a lightning bolt. I felt the room spinning, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this be happening? How could the two people I trusted the most betray me so completely? I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring. It felt like time had stopped. I didn't even register the panic in their eyes as they scrambled to separate, their faces pale with fear. I didn't care about their explanations, their apologies. All I could feel was a raw, painful betrayal that tore through me, unraveling everything I thought I knew about the people I loved. I quietly left the room and walked away without saying a word. The numbness consumed me, and I didn't know what to do or where to go. I ended up outside, wandering aimlessly in the dark, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. I didn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind? Eventually, I made my way home. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt suffocating. I stood in front of the mirror, not recognizing the woman staring back at me, the person who had believed in love, in trust, in family. That woman seemed distant, almost like a stranger. The truth was undeniable. David and Sarah had betrayed me in the most horrific way. The next day, I did the only thing that felt right. I called off the engagement. I didn't want to have a long conversation or make any excuses. I couldn't be with someone who had lied to me, who had hurt me so deeply. And I couldn't stay in a family where betrayal was so easily swept under the rug. My parents, of course, sided with Sarah. They were more concerned about the damage to her reputation than the pain I was experiencing. They called me selfish and unreasonable and told me I should just let it go. I was the one who was supposed to protect the family's image, even at the cost of my own feelings. But I couldn't. Not this time. I packed my things, left the engagement party early, and cut off all contact with David and Sarah. I didn't want their apologies or their excuses. I needed to heal, and I couldn't do that in the same toxic space. My parents tried to reach out, but I didn't respond. They sent texts, emails, and left voicemails, begging me to come back, to fix things, to forgive them. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't go back to a family that didn't understand the gravity of what had happened. The only person who didn't try to push me to forgive them was my grandmother, Martha. She was the only one who understood, who simply told me that I didn't have to go through this alone. She never questioned my decision, never suggested I should reconcile. She just stood by me, offering her support and reminding me that family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, respect, and trust. That was a turning point for me. I realized that I didn't need to accept betrayal. I didn't have to tolerate the toxic relationships my family expected me to keep. I could choose who I surrounded myself with, and that choice could be based on love, not obligation. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making the right decision for me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I had to walk away from the people who had hurt me. The only question now was where I would go from here. After I walked away from David and Sarah, things didn't get easier. Even though I felt like I was making the right decision, the emotional fallout was intense. I had expected some pain. Of course, it hurt, but I didn't anticipate just how deep the betrayal would go. The reality was that even though David had hurt me, the hardest part of this was my family's reaction. My parents couldn't grasp why I wasn't just getting over it. They kept calling, sending messages, acting like everything could be fixed with a few apologies and an understanding smile. They didn't want to confront the reality of what had happened. Instead, they focused on Sarah's well-being, her future, her reputation. It was as if I didn't even matter in the equation anymore. They wanted me to forgive her, to forgive David, and move on like nothing had ever happened, as if the trauma I felt wasn't valid. The first few weeks after everything fell apart were a blur. I was in shock, still trying to process what had happened. My mind kept cycling through the image of Sarah and David together, in my room, on my bed. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been living in denial. I had ignored the little signs, the subtle shifts in behavior, all the while thinking I could trust them. I didn't want to talk to anyone, but my grandmother, Martha, was always there. She was the only person in my life who didn't push me to reconcile or forgive. She just listened, didn't offer judgment, and when I needed it, she'd wrap me in a hug, reassuring me that what I was feeling was completely justified. "You're allowed to feel this, Clara," she'd say. "This isn't on you. It's their mess, not yours." I found solace in my work, researching, writing, and teaching. It was the one place where I could lose myself, where the world didn't seem as complicated. Science was logical. It didn't play games. My studies became my refuge, my way of coping with the emotional wreckage. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was competing with anyone. There was no pressure to measure up to Sarah, no need to impress my parents. I was just Clara, the researcher, and I could focus on something I was good at. I started withdrawing from social circles, not because I didn't want to see people, but because I wasn't ready to talk about what happened. The thought of explaining everything to friends, colleagues, or anyone who didn't know felt like a burden I wasn't prepared to carry. I couldn't trust anyone else's judgment about what I should do. I needed to find my own way. It was around this time that I received an email from Richard, Sarah's now ex-husband. He had found out the truth about what had happened between Sarah and David. I wasn't sure how I felt about hearing from him, but something about his message seemed sincere. He was surprised, shocked even, and wanted to know if I was okay. It was a strange comfort to know that someone understood the gravity of the situation, even if that person was, in a way, also a casualty of Sarah's betrayal. When I saw Richard face to face a week later, I was still processing everything. He was quiet, cautious in his words, but what struck me was his admission of how much he regretted what had happened. He wasn't excusing Sarah's actions, but he acknowledged that he should have done more to protect me from her. In that moment, I realized that while Sarah was my blood, it was Richard who understood the depth of what she had done. He'd been hurt too, in his own way, but he had no delusions about the type of person Sarah was. While we spoke, he apologized again. It was odd hearing it from him, but somehow it made me feel like I could start to close a chapter. We parted on good terms, and I wished him well, hoping that he would be able to rebuild his life. As the weeks passed, I still couldn't bring myself to respond to my parents' messages. They had, of course, tried to call and text, but I wasn't ready. I didn't want to pretend that everything could be fixed with a conversation. They didn't understand the trauma, the hurt, and the years of built-up resentment I had towards them for always protecting Sarah over me. Eventually, they stopped reaching out as often, but the guilt started to creep in. A voice in my head told me I should be the one to make the first move. But when I thought about it, I realized I was the one who had been wronged, not them. It wasn't up to me to repair the relationship. It was up to them to acknowledge the hurt they had caused and to take responsibility for their actions. Then came the moment I realized I needed to fully detach. I couldn't go back to the same family dynamic where I was expected to constantly forgive and forget. For once, I had to stand up for myself. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove my worth to my family, to Sarah, and to David, but the truth was, they didn't deserve that effort anymore. I started thinking more about my future. What did I want for myself now that I had cut ties with the people who had hurt me? The thought of finding a new path was both terrifying and liberating. I knew I had a long way to go before I healed completely, but the more I focused on myself and my work, the clearer my path seemed. That's when I met Michael. It had been a few weeks since I walked away from everything. David, Sarah, my parents. I found myself adrift, uncertain of what came next. But there was something oddly liberating about the decision, a sense of freedom that I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant weight of betrayal hanging over me, I started to focus on what truly mattered, my work. Research had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt like a lifeline. I dove deeper into my projects, threw myself into my studies, and felt a sense of control I hadn't had in years. At least in my lab, things made sense. Results were predictable. Variables were measurable. It was a place where I could retreat from the noise of the world. One afternoon, a few weeks after everything fell apart, I was sitting at a coffee shop near the university campus, reviewing some papers. The place was quiet, with just the hum of espresso machines and soft chatter in the background. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed someone sitting at the table next to me. He was reading architectural journals, clearly absorbed in his work, and I could feel the energy of focus that mirrored my own. It didn't take long for us to strike up a conversation. His name was Michael, a professor of architecture who worked at a nearby university. We talked about research, shared frustrations about the bureaucracy of academia, and swapped stories of the challenges we faced in our respective fields. His interest in my work felt different from anyone I had ever met. He wasn't just being polite or making small talk, he was genuinely curious. Michael didn't try to charm me with compliments or try to win me over with his words. He just listened, really listened to what I had to say. It was refreshing, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't being judged or overshadowed. We talked for hours, and as we did, I could feel a spark of something new. It wasn't romantic at first. It was more about the connection, the kind of intellectual companionship I hadn't realized I was missing. Over the next few months, Michael and I met regularly for coffee or lunch, sometimes to discuss research, other times to simply talk about life. We both respected each other's space, never rushing anything, but there was an undeniable chemistry building between us. With each conversation, I felt a little less broken, a little more like myself. I found myself looking forward to our meetings, not just for the academic discussions, but for the person I was becoming around him. Michael was kind, patient, and grounded. He didn't push me to talk about my past, and when I did open up, he listened without judgment. He shared his own experiences, his own challenges with family, with expectations, and it made me realize how much we had in common. Like me, he had faced pressure to conform, to meet the demands of others. But he had carved his own path, and I admired that strength. One evening, while we were discussing a new project we were thinking of collaborating on, Michael casually said, "You know, you're really inspiring. Not just your work, but your resilience. It's impressive how you've handled everything that's come your way." I didn't know what to say at first. It had been a long time since anyone had complimented me without trying to tie it to something else, like my looks or some external accomplishment. He wasn't trying to flatter me. He was simply acknowledging the strength I didn't even realize I had. That was the moment something shifted. I realized I could open up again. I could trust again, not just in my work, but in the people I allowed into my life. I wasn't sure what it meant for Michael and me, but for the first time since everything had gone wrong, I felt the possibility of something good. I had no idea how much that connection would change everything, but in that moment, I knew something profound had started to grow, something real, something that felt like it could last. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future not defined by the pain of my past. It's been a few months since I called off my engagement to David and cut ties with my family. Honestly, I didn't think I could ever recover from that level of betrayal, but I was slowly finding a new sense of strength I didn't know I had. I threw myself into my work and spent a lot of time with my grandmother, Martha, who was my constant source of support. She was always there for me, helping me navigate the mess of emotions I was sorting through. I knew I had to focus on myself now, on my career, my well-being, and healing. I had no place for people who didn't truly respect me. That's when I met Michael. We'd crossed paths a couple of times at academic conferences, both of us deeply immersed in our respective research. He was an architect who specialized in creating spaces for universities, laboratories, research centers, and everything in between. We had exchanged a few polite greetings, but we'd never actually spoken at length. One day, we ended up at the same coffee shop after a long day of meetings. As it turns out, we both preferred the same type of coffee. Dark roast, no sugar, just pure strength. It felt like a small thing, but it broke the ice. We ended up talking for over an hour. At first, it was just small talk. Our work, the latest trends in academia, the projects we were working on, but quickly it turned into something deeper. Michael didn't just listen to me. He heard me. He asked insightful questions about my research, but more importantly, he asked about me as a person. No one had ever really done that before. Not in a way that felt genuine. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove my worth to others, but with Michael, I didn't feel like I had to. He didn't need to be impressed. He just wanted to understand. Our connection grew quickly. We started talking about collaborating on a project, combining his architectural designs with my research on lab efficiency. The project excited me, but even more so, the way he respected my expertise. We spent hours going over ideas and planning things out, both professionally and personally. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. A few weeks later, I found myself standing in the kitchen of Michael's apartment, chopping vegetables for dinner. It was a typical night. We'd been working late, and neither of us had the energy to go out. But that evening felt different. As I was reaching for the butter in the fridge, Michael turned to me with a small box in his hand. My heart skipped a beat. I'd never expected this moment. We hadn't even talked about it in those terms. But he simply handed me the box, and before I could say anything, he spoke softly, almost shyly. "You know, we've been talking a lot about merging our work. What if we merged our lives too? I mean, what do you think?" I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. He wasn't on one knee, and there wasn't a long, drawn-out speech. It wasn't like the movies. And yet, in that moment, it felt more meaningful than anything I could have imagined. The ring inside the box was simple but elegant. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed, "Look at me." It was a reflection of who we were together. Modest, thoughtful, and deeply connected. I blinked a few times, overwhelmed by emotion, and then said, "Yes," through a laugh and a few tears. What hit me the hardest, though, wasn't just the proposal itself, but the way Michael spoke about my career. He didn't try to sideline it or suggest I'd have to choose between being his partner and pursuing my research. He was excited about it, just as much as he was excited about our future together. He even included something small but thoughtful, a matching desk lamp designed for late-night research sessions, the kind of touch only someone who truly understood the demands of my work would think of. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to me. I wasn't losing myself in this relationship. I was gaining something better, a partner who supported my dreams without trying to change them. As we talked about our future, something inside me shifted. I realized that for the first time, I could make a decision for my career without fearing it would sabotage my relationships. Michael wasn't threatened by my success. He celebrated it. In fact, when I told him I had received an offer for a position at a university near his, a prominent role that would be a significant career boost, his first reaction wasn't jealousy or fear, but excitement. "Tell me about the research opportunities," he asked, genuinely interested. I couldn't believe it. With David, I always felt like I had to compromise my ambitions for the sake of the relationship. But with Michael, I felt like I could be my true self, my whole self. And for once, the choice wasn't between love and career. It was about both. A couple of weeks later, my grandmother Martha, who was delighted to see me so happy, took me shopping for a new outfit to wear for our engagement party. As I stood in front of the mirror, wearing the dress she had picked out for me, she said something that struck me deep. "Clara, you're glowing because you're finally free to be who you are. Not because of the dress, but because you're being true to yourself." I felt it in every fiber of my being. I was no longer weighed down by the expectations of my family, by the toxic relationships that had held me back for so long. I was free. And as I looked at Michael standing beside me, ready to take this next step in our journey, I realized that this was the kind of love I had been searching for. Not one that made me sacrifice who I was, but one that allowed me to become who I was always meant to be. The wedding plans had been moving along smoothly until my parents did the unexpected. I had already told them that I didn't want Sarah at the wedding, but apparently, they thought they could just bypass my wishes. Without consulting me, they invited her anyway. Their reasoning was simple. She's your sister. Family should be together on important days. When I saw the email from my mom about Sarah being added to the guest list, a knot tightened in my stomach. I felt the old panic rise in my chest. Why couldn't they understand? After everything that had happened, after everything Sarah had done to me, how could they expect me to just let her back into my life? I could already hear the voices in my head. You need to forgive. Family is family. But it wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. It was about boundaries, about choosing myself for once. I immediately called Michael. His response was calm, reassuring. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," he said, his voice unwavering. He didn't hesitate for a second, and that gave me the strength to think clearly. I didn't have to explain myself, not to him. I didn't have to apologize for my pain or my decisions. He was there for me, no matter what. We talked it through together, and I felt myself getting more confident. This wasn't just about avoiding conflict with my parents. It was about protecting my peace. Michael's support was exactly what I needed at that moment. I couldn't let my past dictate my future, especially not on one of the most important days of my life. I knew that confronting my parents would be difficult, but I had to do it. There was no other choice. I didn't want Sarah anywhere near my wedding, not after what she had done, and I wasn't going to let my family's toxic dynamics ruin this day for me. When I wrote the email to my parents, I made it clear, this is not open for discussion. I told them that Sarah would not be attending the wedding, and if they couldn't respect that, then I didn't want them there either. It was blunt, but it was necessary. I couldn't keep tiptoeing around their feelings when they had never once considered mine. Their reaction was just as I expected. Mom called me crying, and Dad sent a long, tearful email about forgiveness and family unity. They tried to guilt trip me, as they always did. But this time, I didn't falter. I didn't give in. I stood firm in my decision. The more they pushed, the more resolute I became. I wasn't going to let them make my choices for me anymore. In the end, they didn't respond to my boundaries, and that was okay. I didn't need them to approve. It was my wedding, my life, and Michael and I were building something beautiful together. The people who truly mattered, Michael, his family, and my research team, were the ones who supported me through it all. It wasn't just about standing up to my parents. It was about taking control of my own narrative. I wasn't going to let the past control my present anymore. It was liberating to finally make a choice that was solely for me. When Michael's parents, especially Linda, came to the rescue with practical solutions for the ceremony, I realized how much love and understanding I had found in my new chosen family. Linda reassured me several times that the wedding would go exactly as we wanted, and she even helped organize extra security to ensure there were no surprises. I felt seen, heard, and, for the first time in a long time, truly cared for. The wedding day arrived, and I was ready. I stood by Michael, surrounded by people who respected me, who saw me for who I truly was. I wasn't just the hurt sister, the ex-fiancé, or the woman with a painful past. I was Clara, the woman who had found a love so pure, so real that nothing could ruin it, not even my past. The ceremony itself felt like a moment of pure liberation. When I walked down the aisle, with my grandmother proudly at my side, I wasn't just walking toward Michael, I was walking away from the chains of my past, from the toxic expectations my family had placed on me for years. Michael was waiting for me with a smile, ready to start our life together, and that's all that mattered. As I exchanged vows with Michael, I knew I was finally free. We promised to always support each other, no matter what. Even if it meant building a lab together, even if it meant staying up late doing research, we would always have each other's backs. And that was more than I had ever hoped for. The reception was beautiful, free from the drama I had feared, and filled with love from those who truly mattered. I knew my decision to stand my ground had been right. There was no place for those who didn't respect me in my life anymore. This was my day, my choice, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. A year had passed since Michael and I said our vows, and the changes in my life still felt surreal. When I look back at everything, it's hard to believe how far I've come from that dark place. From the heartache of betrayal and family dysfunction to the warmth of love and belonging, my life had done a complete 180. The biggest news was that Michael and I were expecting our first child. To say it felt overwhelming would be an understatement. When I first saw the positive pregnancy test, I froze. The flood of emotions was immediate: fear, uncertainty, even a bit of panic. I had never considered becoming a mother before, certainly not in the middle of all the upheaval I'd gone through. My first instinct was to push it all away, to bury my fears in my work, and let everything just continue on its current trajectory. But Michael was there for me in a way I couldn't have imagined. As soon as I showed him the test, he held me close. "We're going to be great parents," he said, his voice calm and steady. "This baby is going to have the best mom. You're brilliant, and you'll love this child with everything you have. I know it." His unwavering belief in me was like a lifeline. I hadn't been sure of much in my life for a long time, but Michael's confidence in me felt real. He wasn't just talking about my ability to be a mother. He was talking about my worth as a person, a partner, a professional. It was the kind of support I never thought I'd find, let alone expect from someone who was still relatively new in my life. With his encouragement, I started to look at the pregnancy in a new light. Yes, there were still moments of anxiety about what it meant to bring a child into this world, especially when the memories of my own family dynamics were still so fresh. But Michael was right. We were creating something new, something born out of love and mutual respect. This child wouldn't be part of the tangled mess of my past. This was a new chapter, one that we were writing together. We also began building our future in practical ways. Michael and I designed a new lab at the university. It was a dream come true for both of us. He helped me with the architecture, ensuring that the space was not just functional, but inspiring. It would be a place where I could push the boundaries of my research, but also a place that could nurture our growing family. A secure play area for the baby was integrated into the design right next to my desk. The idea was simple but perfect. My child could be near me as I worked, a space where both the baby and my research could grow together. The lab was finished a few months before our baby's arrival. It became our sanctuary, a place where both of us could thrive without sacrificing our personal lives. Michael put so much thought into the details, like safety features for the baby, but also making sure that the environment would foster creativity and inspiration. His support wasn't just emotional, it was tangible, seen in the little things he did every day. At home, things were equally calm and fulfilling. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to anyone. Michael and I worked side by side, each of us focused on our respective careers, but also creating a space where we could share our dreams. There was no hierarchy of love in our house, no competitions, no hidden resentments. It was just two people supporting each other unconditionally, celebrating each other's successes, and comforting one another through challenges. Grandma Martha, who had become one of my greatest sources of strength, was overjoyed by the pregnancy. She had always been my greatest supporter, the one person who truly saw me for who I was. When we told her the news, she practically jumped out of her chair. "This baby is going to have the most incredible role model," she said, her eyes twinkling. "And you're going to be an amazing mother." I had never been entirely sure of what kind of mother I would be, but hearing her say that gave me the confidence to believe in myself. For the first time, I felt like I was stepping into a role that I could embrace fully. My parents, despite everything that had happened, continued to make attempts to reach out. They were eager to be part of the baby's life. I wasn't ready to open that door fully. I had learned that sometimes family doesn't have to be defined by blood. It's about the people who love and support you, who are there for you when it matters most. That's what Michael and I had built. our family, our chosen circle of people who valued us for who we were. As much as I appreciated their desire to be involved, I knew that the wounds of the past couldn't simply be healed by time or good intentions. Some relationships require real change, and I wasn't willing to put my own happiness and peace at risk for the sake of maintaining appearances. It wasn't about holding grudges, it was about protecting the life Michael and I were building together. At the same time, I found that I no longer needed to look over my shoulder or wonder if I was doing the right thing. I had stopped seeking approval from those who had let me down. I had found my own path, and now it was about walking that path with Michael. Together we were building a future based on love, trust, and mutual respect. As the months passed, the baby's due date grew nearer. We talked excitedly about names, about what life would be like as parents, about all the little things that would change when the baby arrived. But at the same time, I held on to the truth I had learned over the past year. The only thing that truly mattered was the love and support we gave each other. I was ready for this next chapter. I wasn't the same person I had been a year ago. I wasn't the woman broken by betrayal or trapped by the expectations of my family. I was stronger, more whole, and more confident in who I was. And I had Michael by my side, a man who saw me not as the sum of my past mistakes, but as someone capable of building a beautiful future. Together, we were about to create a life, our life, and this time it was going to be nothing like before.